everybody, you're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rockola Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We share a few announcements and we catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also reach out to me here at the studio on Dane.Cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. That's DANE.COBAIN at wickhamsound.org.uk. And I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s they'd like to share, people with news they would like to share, etc, etc, etc. If you want to be a guest on the show, all of that good stuff, don't hesitate to get in touch. So this week we have a catch-up show. We are going to be catching up to see what's new with previous guests Jason White and Stevyn Colgan. But before we do that, we are going to check out this week's first announcement. Well, only announcement. We do one announcement per show. Alright, so an update from Twangling Jack Ford. He writes in to say, as myself and Saul Hawks have been busking in Wickham Town Centre, usually around lunchtime on a Sunday. We are concentrating on early 70s rock as played by David Bowie, T-Rex, Slade, Mott the Hoople, etc. We call ourselves the Glam Buskers. We also have a gig at Festival 2025 on the 3rd of August at the Bell in Risborough. As is always the way in the Wickham music scene, Matt on drums also plays in another band and Phil on bass plays in 2 other bands. So I'm looking for anyone who wants to busk, either in the playing in the street meaning of the word or also to play without being fully rehearsed. Maybe to get more gigs. Also, please check out my Twangling Jack in the Oak Shed YouTube channel with all my recommendations, spoken word pieces and original music. And please like and subscribe. Alrighty, that was this week's announcement. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. And it's time to head over to the Rockola Zone now for the latest instalment of my comic fantasy novel, Monsters of Rock. Chapter 2, The Moonchild, 1992. It was a couple of months later, and the news channels were filled with speculation about the upcoming Freddie Mercury tribute concert, which had an expected televised audience of 1 billion people, or nearly 20% of the people on the planet. Not that Yeva Bankovskis would be tuning in. There wasn't much reception in Pekini Forest, although there were rumours that NASA had discovered some form of an inexplicable energy radiating from the depths of the canopies. The conspiracy nuts thought it was aliens. Yeva Bankovskis knew it was just her battered old Volkswagen campervan, which was suspended among the treetops and camouflaged with elvish magic so that it stayed out of the sight of prying eyes below. The energy wasn't alien. It was just the elvish eco-fire that powered the thing's engine. Yeva Bankovskis was a drow elf, a dark elf, and very different to the more photogenic and recognisable wood elves. She wore all black, from the hair that she held in a ponytail with golden circlets, to the unidentifiable feathers of her cloak, and the coal-blackened wood bark and iron ringlets that made up her armour. She even wore black boots and black gauntlets, and had a black handle for her black sword, which hung across her back in a black sheath. She wore black eyeliner and black nail varnish, but she didn't use lipstick. She wasn't trying to look attractive, she was trying to look terrifying. And she succeeded. She was also a Latvian, born in Riga in 1888 before the country was even a country. She had fought alongside pensioners and children in 1918 to defend the city from both the Russians and the Germans, perched in the trees with a short bow and arrow. 30 years later, after the city fell to the Russians, the Germans and then the Russians again during the Second World War, she had fought with the resistance, the Forest Brothers. When the last of them had given up the fight and handed themselves in, she had stayed behind in the forest. And she'd rarely left the place since. By 1992, Latvia was celebrating its newly regained independence, but Yeva was in no mood to celebrate. Instead, she preferred to stay in the woods, entertaining herself at night by playing folk songs on her portable piano. She was a talented pianist and an above-average singer, but it still caused a lot of tension. That's because she shared the campervan with her husband, a wood elf called Yanis Bankovskis, who made a reasonable living as one of the country's leading poets. During the Soviet era, he'd been forced to write about the party. Now that the constraints had been lifted, he was suffering from writer's block and was quick to blame his lack of inspiration on the lack of government-mandated work. Yeva wasn't so sure about that. It had been Yeva's idea to move into the van, and Janis had always resented it. Even though he was a wood elf and they were living in the woods, he was used to having more people around. The Latvian forest harboured all kinds of magical life, especially those that had grown over ley lines. But Pekini Forest had remained empty, and that's exactly why Yeva had chosen it. She liked the peace and quiet. Not for the first time, that peace and quiet was being interrupted by an argument. That was the latest instalment of Monsters of Rock by myself, Dane Cobain. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Rob Full Stop with Entropy.
How about some champagne?
Champagne? Is there really even a more interesting choice than champagne?
The dusty 20 nights of worry champagne and choices have gone away. I wish I could tell you how sorry I'm for the mess we left your way. School catchment and HGTV, we bought the best on interest only. Now we've pressed you out of the city. You say you can't start a family.
A more interesting choice than champagne.
The toasty teddy nights of worry, the champagne and choices have gone away. I wish I could tell you how sorry I'm for the mess we left your way. The neighbors right got a bit stancy, so we reached out for a PCP. How could we know it would go so hard? Betting metal for the parking lot. I miss those times when we could give the boys a good night kiss. In the days when just one job was enough to pay the bills. The dusty Saturday nights of worry, champagne and choices have gone away. I wish I could tell you how sorry I'm for the mess we left your way. For the mess we left your way. For the mess we left your way.
That was Champagne and Choices by Faiblesse Parfaite, and before that we had Rob Full Stop with Entropy. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be joined in conversation now with by previous guest Jason White, who is an author. He's going to be telling us what's new since last time we spoke.
So what have you been up to in that time?
Well, a lot. I switched jobs recently. And the last job I had, I was working for I was approaching 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
but it was like 12-hour shifts,
Yeah.
and I just didn't have any energy to really create anything. So I switched jobs, and now I have like a lot more free time,
Mm-hmm.
and I have like mornings that I can use to work on my writing and whatnot, which is it's really great for my brain
Yeah.
because say around approaching noon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my brain starts to turn to mush.
Yeah.
So I've released a couple of things. Most notably, I released this. It's Attack on Sasquatch Valley. It's a collection of 4 short stories, all set in the same area of Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically a lead up. They're loosely based, or they're loosely tied together, and it's basically about Sasquatch attacking. It's just a fun horror, kind of nasty, gory stuff. It's not too. I wouldn't say it's extreme or anything like that, but it's just fun.
Yeah. No, awesome. I love the cover as well, because you've got the Northern Lights there in the background as well.
Yeah. Gemma Amor actually did the cover for this. She's a writer too,
Yeah.
from your part of the world, I believe. It was so I hired her to do that, and that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Cool. And you mentioned you've had a few different projects. So what else have you published over the last few years? You mentioned that's your most notable one.
Well, that's like all mine. The second one is I co-wrote a book with Eric Brown, Eric
Mm-hmm.
S. Brown. He's known for doing more Sasquatch. I'm gonna be pegged as like a Sasquatch horror writer, but I don't think I'm gonna be doing any more of that. At least it's not planned. But anyways, we wrote a book together called Killer Bears,
Yeah.
and it takes place in America or the United States, and it's about this young woman who obtains the power to control bears, and and she goes back to her hometown to use the bears around there because the town is like in the middle of nowhere basically, and she uses the bears that are around there. She possesses them with her power, and they attack the town, and it's just utter mayhem. It's
Awesome.
another fun romp and whatnot.
And what was that process like of co-writing with somebody? How did you find that?
That was actually really easy. Working with Eric was really. I think we both knew what we wanted out of that
Mm,
story, and so it wasn't hard to write. It's about 30,000 words, I think,
yeah,
and so it's about as the same length as this. Really, it's pretty thin.
yeah,
Um, and we wrote it in 3 weeks. There was days where I was pushing like 2,000 words a day,
yeah.
and it was a lot of fun. I was a little worried, apprehensive because I've never done that before, but it worked out for the best, I think.
Awesome. And what are some of your sort of works in progress and unpublished works that you're hoping to get out over? I mean, again, if let's say we don't chat for another 3 years, what books do you hope to have published, printed, and in your hands by then?
Well, there's one book that you actually edited for me.
Hmm.
It's called The Haunted Country. It's a re-release. You did this for me way back in like 2000, the year 2020, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. Yeah.
I'm going th I started the edits back then, but I was at that job and I just ended up abandoning it because I was always so tired, and that
Mm,
takes a lot of going through those edits. It's a lot of work, and I
hmm.
was trying to write other things at the same time, so I just kind of abandoned it, but I've picked it up again and I'm about halfway through now, and I'm hoping to release it by the end of the year, so you'll see that come out. And I also finished a novella. Uh, it's a little more serious than the other two books I mentioned, like this one. It's about alcoholism and a comet, a comet that grows terrible fungus things. And I'm going to be shopping that one around, seeing if I can sell it. It's all done now. It's ready to be sent out, and so I'm going to be doing that shortly.
Awesome. And in terms of your, your other creative outlets, you've obviously still got you've got your YouTube channel, you've got your podcast as well. What can you
Mhm.
tell us about those?
Well, the podcast is the Weird Reads podcast. I actually have two now. I just started a new one called Short Bites, a Stephen King podcast,
Hmm.
and that one is where we I have a new guest on every episode, and we talk about a Stephen King short story. Um, and but the older one, Weird Reads, I've been doing that one for a long time. It's kind of an extension of my YouTube channel where I talk to authors. I tend to talk to horror authors, and I'm sort of moving away from not moving away from it, but I'm expanding
Mm.
into different territory where we talk about genres and short stories, and we sort of analyze that type of stuff, and I'll have guests on for that. And it's a lot of fun. I'm kind of addicted to doing podcasts.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been getting addicted to listening to them as well because I do it while running, and so it makes me want to go out for a run because I'm like, if I go for a run, I can listen to the next episode of so and
Yeah,
so. So
that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll definitely have to, especially that Stephen King one sounds right up my street as well. And mentioning Stephen King, so what have you been reading lately?
Oh man, I've been reading Stephen King short stories. I recently read The Life of Chuck over again. Reread it because the movie came out. So of
Hmm.
course, we do what we do. And also I'm in the middle of Never Flinch by Stephen King. And I'm also oh, what is it? Let me check here quickly. Oh yeah, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McLeod Chapman. I'm listening to that audiobook right now, and it's really quite good. It's
Awesome.
it's it's phenomenal, actually.
Cool, awesome. And so you've got I can see in the background there you've got your kind of collection of your various reads and whatnot as well. But you mentioned there you've got audio. What do you do it sort of a bit of every format? Are you just sort of physical books and audio? And also like when do you listen to your audiobooks?
Well, to answer the last one first, I listen to my podcasts sometimes at work and sometimes well, mostly while driving
Hmm.
and doing like odd jobs and whatnot. I find that I can get a lot done actually, and going for walks, stuff like that.
Hmm.
Mostly I stick to ebooks these days because it's just easier.
Hmm.
I find it difficult bringing a book around with me. Although if I were to choose between the two, I love reading from a physical book better, but I just like the convenience. I'm kind of
Yeah.
lazy in that way. If it's convenient, I'll go to it, but I don't like reading off my phone, so I actually have like an e-reader that
Yeah.
I carry with me. So I read from that. And if I like the books enough, then I'll buy it and I'll put
Yeah.
it in my collection.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I wanted to ask you as well, being an indie author yourself, do you read many other indie authors?
Oh yes, totally. This is a question that always gets me. Actually, there's one reader or writer that I was introduced to, and I had him on my show, and his name is Robbie Dorman. Uh, he's a really fun writer, and he tends to have a lot of like social commentary
Mm.
in his books. I don't know if you can call Haley Piper indie anymore because she's like storming through everything, but I love Haley Piper. Um, oh man. There's more. There's a
Yeah.
lot more. I mostly read indie horror write or just writers
Yeah.
because there's always like a wider I find selection, right?
Yeah.
They're not just following the cookie cutter type plot. Well, I read you too, Dane Cobain. There we go. There's
I
one.
hear he's good. Yeah.
And Charles Heathcote or
Yeah.
Charlie Heathcote. I love him. His Dora Dear Dora series.
Yeah.
Those are great. Yeah, Todd Kiesling. He's really awesome. He wrote a book recently called The Sundowners Dance, and I had him on my show for that.
Yeah.
That book is like phenomenal. I highly recommend that. There's like all these like uh crazy little books that are just like extreme horror, like
Mm.
Huber by Lance Lute. Uh, is it okay to swear on your show?
I have to bleep it out.
Okay, it's called It's in the Water,
Yeah.
and it's by Matt Michelli. One of my favorite writers is Daniel Brahm. He's
Right.
like a phenomenal short story writer. Uh, he writes these dreamy, weird, strange little stories that
Mm.
border on horror, but they're not necessarily horror. I highly recommend Daniel Brahm to almost anyone who likes more of a slow burn, uh, perhaps a inward looking
Mm.
type of horror story.
Awesome. Well, and as you say, that's one of the joys of kind of reading indie, and there's quite often you can just dip in and out. I think anthologies are great for that as well, where you can, read 18 short stories or whatever on a theme. Um, but you mentioned, I wanted to go back to the choice of formats. Do you read indie, like, again, is it predominantly via Kindle that you pick those up, or do you pick up the paperbacks? How do you kind of go about getting the indies? Because they can be a little bit harder to get hold of sometimes.
They are, especially since, well, I do have a Kindle, but I mostly use a Kobo.
Hmm.
The Kindle is almost like easy. Most indie horror authors are like on Kindle
Mm.
Unlimited. So you kind of have to go that route, whether no matter what you
Mm.
feel about like Amazon, if you think Amazon is the big monster, which I kind of feel that way. That it's like the evil corporate machine that's trying to
Hmm.
eat everything else up in the world. But at the same time, if you want to read indie authors, that's the place where you
Yeah.
have to do it. But Kobo has a similar book club. It's called Kobo Plus,
Yeah.
and you can read if you join that club, you can read a lot of indie horror or other writers that way too. It's filled with indie stuff. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. And like I said, if I like the book enough,
Mm.
then I go and buy the physical copy from my library.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. And just to end on then, what's next from you, and where can people follow you? Where can they check out your podcasts? All of that good stuff.
Sure. If you want to follow me on YouTube, it's Jason's Weird Reads. You can check out my podcasts. The Weird Reads podcast, you can find that anywhere you download your podcasts. And you can also listen while you're there. You might as well check out Short Bites too, especially if you're a Stephen King fan. I'm like pretty much on all the socials. Just look for Jason_White74, and you'll probably find me because I pretty much call myself the same thing pretty much everywhere. And I have a short story coming out this summer. The short story's title is All Along These Haunted Hills. And it's sort of a tie-in to these stories. Yeah. And then by the end of the year, hopefully my zombie novel, The Haunted Country, should be out.
Big thank you to Jason White for catching up with us. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Twangling Jack Ford with Woke Mind Virus.
We are the ones you call lazy, we're the ones you call weak. We are the tree huggers of which you speak. But you will find we are absolutely tireless when it comes to spreading the woke mind virus. Recycling will recycle, we embrace the strange. We change our minds cause we've got minds to change. We just wanna spread a little bit of kindness. You'll turn your back on violence when you catch the woke mind virus, yeah. Whenever no regulations, the amoral will thrive. With no fact check, cause the truth could not survive. But equally you'll find that no ties can bind us. Your lies cannot blind us when we have the woke mind virus, yeah. Still fly. World War III is coming, and I'm fixing to die. Fish will swim, birds may still fly. World War III is coming, and I'm fixing to die. Fish will swim, birds may still fly. World War III is coming, and I'm fixing to die.
That was Woke Mind Virus by Twangling Jack Ford. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. And it's time now for us to be joined by our second guest of the week, author Stevyn Colgan, who is going to tell us what's new with him.
All right, well, let's get started, and then we'll whiz through, and I can let you go and get the fan on. So I only have one question for you, really, which is what's new with you since last time we spoke? And I appreciate that's a pretty broad question because we spoke about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, maybe even a bit longer than that. So,
was it pre-COVID? I'm just
it wasn't. It definitely wasn't pre-COVID, but it might have been very first COVID lockdown, I think.
Yeah, it might well have been. I mean, because obviously COVID was a big thing. Because I pretty much lost all my work. You know, it was because you couldn't travel, couldn't do this and that. I mean, it didn't stop me doing stuff. I mean, the biggest thing I did during lockdown, of course, was the Monster Zoo project, which was the. I think we've talked about it before. Yeah,
I think it must have been just around then.
Yeah, where I basically made some monsters out of junk and hid them in some local woods for kids to find, and then told them to make their own. And we got so many monsters that we got too much for the woods. So we had a local farmer gave us a field and we set up a monster zoo. And it was great because it gave the kids something to do. It got them out in the open air. It meant that people could socially distance, chat to each other. They could see their friends, you know, parents could see each other. And as you know, it caught the eye of Grayson Perry, now Sir Grayson Perry, of course, and we got featured on a TV show. Yeah. And so that was really quite exciting. But sort of picking up the pieces after COVID, I mean, I was very lucky. I landed a job at the local university teaching, which I'm still doing at the moment. So that sort of at least put me back on a financial even keel. But the other thing that happened, of course, during COVID is a lot of publishers they lost a lot of money. And a lot of TV production companies lost a lot of money. So the freelancers like me pretty much got set aside because they just couldn't afford to have us. And the other thing is my most recent book came out during the first year of lockdowns. And as a result, it did nothing. Yeah, because of course there were no book events, no festivals. The bookshops weren't open. And one of the big issues that there's always been with selling books, you know, when you're a fairly unknown author, when you're not a celebrity author, is getting people to see them in the first place. When people go to a site, you know, like Amazon, other sites are available, but when people go to a site like that, they tend to go to that site already knowing what they want to buy. Yeah, because it's not like browsing in a bookshop where you look around, you know, the shelves and you see a cover that jumps out and you think, oh, what's that all about? That doesn't happen because all you've got is like a 1 inch or half an inch thumbnail on the screen. So of course the book did absolutely nothing, and that obviously is going to affect how future publishers would look at taking on a new book. So sort of writing went to one side for pretty much the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, I'm working on a book now, a non-fiction book, which, you know, I'll, you know, maybe start pitching in a little while when I've got to a state where I'm happy with it. But what I've gone back to is my other great love, which is art. And I've been painting like a demon. I've also been reconnecting with a lot of people who I used to know in the sort of neo-pagan community, not particularly because I'm a neo-pagan, but because I'm fascinated with their whole belief system, which is all about, you know, being nice to each other, being kind to the earth. And it seems to be there's a massive upsurge of interest in folk culture at the moment. You know, things like Morris dancing have become sexy again. You know, it's not just the preserve of beardy old men anymore. There are now more women Morris dancers than male Morris dancers. You know, we've had Morris dancing at the Brit Awards. They were on stage. Boss Morris were on stage with Wet Leg a couple of years ago. And it seems wherever I go around the country now, all these events are either springing up from scratch or they're resurrecting old events that used to happen, but, you know, sort of died a death back in the sort of 30s, 40s, 50s. Yeah. And I think a lot of it's to do with people are fed up with all the division. People are fed up with, you know, sort of you're on this, you know, you're a Brexiteer or you're a Remainer or you're anti-trans or you're pro-trans, you know, you're an anti-vaxxer or you're a vaccinator. You know, everything seems to be about polarization and sides. And the great thing about folk culture and folk events is that, I mean, I organised one that took place last weekend, or I co-organised one last weekend that took place down at West Wickham. We had a summer solstice event there. We had Morris dancers, we had live music, we had, you know, food vans. I gave a talk in the Hellfire Caves, and it was brilliant. We sold 350 tickets online, and we had at least 150 people through the gate on top of that. It was a wonderful thing. Yeah, because people want to be together. People want that kind of analog experience. You know, they don't want to be sitting online at home. They want to see each other. I think COVID has actually helped that as well. And the other thing is, you look around the field and there's old people and there's young people and there's black and white and brown people. There's able-bodied people, disabled people. There's people there who undoubtedly are straight, gay, trans, bi. None of that matters because it's all about celebrating a place, community and a time of year. And I've become really quite fascinated and embedded in that world, and that kind of relates to the book I'm writing at the moment. Plus, as I said, creating lots of art. Awesome. So that's what I've been up to.
Well, and you mentioned the book you're writing at the moment. Can you tell us a bit about that? And also, obviously, you did your calendar project, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, I mean, the calendar project came out of some of the stuff we've just been talking about because I've got a very good friend, Mark Page, who's a photographer from High Wycombe, award-winning photographer, an amazing photographer. And he was looking to do something a little bit different. And I'd been talking to him about some of the stuff I'd been involved in and some of the festivals and events I'd been to. And he said, oh, I'd be lovely to photograph those sorts of things. And I said, well, why don't we create it? And the idea we came up with was to make a calendar based on what's generally known as the Wheel of the Year. It's a kind of neo-pagan version of the calendar, which divides the year up into 8 segments. But it's actually more scientific. You know, it sounds all a bit woo-woo, but it's actually more scientific than the Gregorian calendar we use now, which is so clumsy and messy. We've got to learn a little rhyme to remember how many days there are in each month. You know, it's a real mess.
And then every 4 years, you got to chuck in an extra day to fix it.
Exactly. Whereas this old Wheel of the Year calendar is based on fixed things. I mean, it's first of all divided into quarters by way of the solstices and the equinoxes. And then between each solstice and equinox segment, there's a point about halfway along there where there's a shift in the natural world. You know, it's the time to plant crops, or when new young animals are being born, you know, if you're running a farm or that sort of thing, or there's, you know, it's time to bring the harvest in. And it actually makes a lot more sense. And we thought, well, as you know, people used to celebrate these 8 divisions of the year with 8 big festivals known as Sabbats. We thought we'd create a calendar based on the Wheel of the Year. So it's actually an 8, not month, but an 8 section calendar. And Mark and I did a big photographic portrait for each one, using quite often, I mean, a couple of professional models, but mostly people from the neo-pagan community. And we printed, you know, a few hundred off to see how they go, and boom, they went like nobody's business. It was great. And it was a really nice thing to do. And of course, we made loads of contacts, made some friends for life, I think, out of some of these things. And it's been great. It's been great. And that kind of leads into the book as well. Because as I was saying, my fascination, I've had a fascination with all things pagan ever since I was a kid. Because as you know, I grew up in southwest Cornwall, where, you know, the traditional Sunday family walk was, right, we're going out for a walk. And in the summer, we couldn't go on the beach because it was full of tourists and you weren't allowed to take your dogs there. So you'd be out walking over some bleak moor somewhere in West Penwith and walking past all these standing stones and dolmens and you know, hold stones and things like that. Excuse me. And hold stones and things like that. And I became fascinated by all that, and the myths and legends. And so I've always had this interest in folk culture. And of course, I used to go to things like the Pads de Obios and Helston Flora Day. And in the last 40 years, you know, I've obviously we got a big thing in Wickham because you've got the weighing of the mare. You know, it's the only town in Wickham. It's the only town in England that does it. Every town in the UK has got its own little tradition like that, its own little bit of folk culture. And I became fascinated with that. And also the fact that there's been this massive increase of interest in folk culture, and also a huge number of people going over to paganism. I mean, when we had the most recent national UK census in 2021, I think it was, for the first time ever, Britain is officially a secular country, because more than 50% of people said they had no religion whatsoever. But one of the biggest growth areas within the faith groups was paganism. And I think a lot of people are being drawn to it because of there's a number of things. I think the environmentalist movement is part of that. I think it's also a little bit to do with identity, because a lot of people feel uncomfortable celebrating, particularly being English. I mean, the Scots, the Welsh, the Cornish, like me, the Irish, we're all quite happy with who we are. But the English have a kind of, I won't say an identity crisis, but they find it difficult to express how brilliant it is to be English. And it is brilliant to be English without bringing up all the baggage of colonialism and all that sort of thing. And of course, the other thing is that some of the symbols, like the flags, have been co-opted by racist groups and things like this. It's all a bit difficult. And I think for a lot of people, this is a way of celebrating being English, being Scottish, being Welsh, being Cornish, being Irish, being Manx, whatever you are, without that baggage. Because it's about community. It's about, as I said, it's about the place. It's about the time of year. And there's no divisions within it. It doesn't matter who you are. You can still be part of those celebrations. And that, to me, is really interesting. So I started basically tracking down the roots of this revival of interest in folk culture. traveling around the country, interviewing all sorts of interesting people, but also looking at it with a bit of a skeptical lens, because obviously, I used to be a cop, as you know, and then I went and worked for things like the TV show QI. A lot of my working life has been about verification of facts and not accepting things at face values. So I've gone into these things not to debunk these things, but to actually find out why people believe these things. And surprisingly, what I've found is at the heart of most of these things, I mean, no spoilers for the book, but at the heart of a lot of these things that happen and a lot of these beliefs that people have, there is a little nub of truth at the heart of it. I mean, I'll give you one simple example. When I was a kid, my gran, who was a farmer, used to say that there was a spirit of the woods, that the trees talk to each other, and she put it down to sort of, magic or pixies or fairies or what. Well, we now know that the trees do talk to each other. I mean, all those things that they observed, our ancestors observed, those physical effects were there. They saw them happening, but they didn't have the language or the science to explain it. So they called it magic or the actions of gods or otherworldly beings. Now we know that it does happen, but it's happening because of a wholly scientific reason, which is, mycelial networks. It's the fungus under the ground that's linking all these things together. So, I mean, that's just one little example. Yeah. And obviously I can't say that fairies and gods don't exist, because it's very difficult in science or in philosophy or anything to say that something doesn't exist, because you have to search the whole of time and space and possibly several multiple universes in order to say, definitively there is no God or there's no this, that, and the other. But what you can do is you can put the burden of proof onto the people who claim these things do exist, which is, I mean, that's how English law works. If you make an allegation against someone, then the burden of proof is on you to find the evidence to show that that person actually did that act. That person doesn't have to defend themselves. They are presumed innocent. Yeah. If you're the accuser or you're the person making the claim, you've got to have the evidence. So what I've done is I've taken that kind of approach, because I've said to people, you say astrology is real. What makes you say that? Yeah. Why do you believe this? What have you got to support that? But again, even with something as potentially sort of woo-woo as astrology, there are some little nubs of truth in amongst it all. And it's been a fascinating thing to research.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that's about it. The only other thing I want to ask is the usual question of kind of what have you got planned next, and where can people follow you to find out more? And do you want to give a little shout out to your YouTube channel as well? Because I think that's a great way for people to sort of see through your eyes, as it were.
Yeah, by all means. I mean, obviously the book is taking my time at the moment, as is a lot of painting and stuff like this. And I might actually be in the process of setting up the first ever solo exhibition of art, which would be quite nice. There's also big things happening in Wickham. I mean, I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder, but there'll be some big announcements around August, September about a new sort of arts collective and a new hub and art space in Wickham, where people can go to find out about everything that's been going on in the arts in Wickham, and I'm involved with that as well. The YouTube channel, that's been a revelation. I started it during lockdown, with me just actually walking around with my dog, over the Chiltern Hills and pointing out what was going on in nature and what bits in the hedgerow you could eat, because I've been foraging most of my life. And it started picking up speed. Then I started doing a few silly things like making ridiculous musical instruments or sculptures out of junk and things like that. And next thing I know, I've got like 65,000 followers. I think actually 67,000 followers now, and the channels have 5 million views. It's mad. But the channel's called Colganology. So my surname with an ology on the end, Colganology. And yeah, please go and have a look if you like it. If it's the sort of thing you like, then, subscribe and you'll get the regular updates. But it's just fun to do. And it doesn't take up any of my life, because I have to walk. I'm a dog owner. So if you own a dog, you should take it for a walk. Yeah. And I'm out every day, and I'm seeing how the countryside changes all around me. Plus, I'm painting. And I'm sculpting, and I'm doing these things anyway. So why not, after I've done a bit of stick a bit of film on it, and I filmed it all. I filmed it all on my phone. Yeah, it's been good fun. So yeah, so if people want to find me, I'm Stevyn, spelt rather oddly, Stevyn. Stevyn Colgan on Facebook and Instagram. That's the only two platforms I'm still on. I'm slowly getting myself off social media. Yeah. And Colganology on YouTube.
Big thank you to Stevyn Colgan for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Broken Colours with their new tune, Hey It's Me.
that voice inside your head. I don't trust no one, I got a paranoid mindset. I make you feel so down for no reason at all. I make you feel so anxious and I make you feel so small. Stop the energy, make you feel so weak, bring you to your knees. You are a part of me. Stop the energy, make you feel so weak, bring you to your knees. You are a part of me. I will keep you worrying about the tiniest of things, and I'll fill you with dread. 'Cause I'm your worst nightmare. I'm the monster under your bed. I'm your worst nightmare. The monster under your bed. Stop the energy, make you feel so weak, bring you to your knees. You are a part of me. Stop the energy, make you feel so weak, bring you to your knees. You are a part of me. We're fighting the same fight. We're in this together. This is our lives. How this won't last forever. So show some compassion and some kindness on your way. You never know, it might make them stay. Stop the energy, make you feel so weak, bring you to your knees. You are a part of me. A part of me. Hey, it's me, that voice inside your head.
You're listening to the Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilk Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
T-Rex by T-Rex. The self-titled T-Rex album followed 4 albums that Mark Bolan made as Tyrannosaurus Rex, 3 with Steve Took and 1 with Mickey Finn. Tyrannosaurus Rex started out purely acoustic but slowly got more electric, and I loved this album. Ride a White Swan, Hot Love and Get It On were all big hits, and I loved them all. They all had 2 or 3 tracks on the B-side, and I loved them as well. Even the one that was a cover, but I only knew the T-Rex version of Summertime Blues. When T-Rex were having their early hits, the only album available was this T-Rex album. The thing is, it was not really that much like Hot Love and Get It On, but it was also not that much like the music of Tyrannosaurus Rex, which was available at the time on a budget compilation that was actually quite good in its own right. I loved the cover of the T-Rex album, a brown square with a half fold over that was a picture that had an unreal quality. They had used some kind of slightly sepia filter that made it match the brown perfectly. I loved that it had backing vocalists who were in Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention. I was not that familiar with Zappa at the time, but this was probably one of the things that made me interested in him. There was something raw about the T-Rex album. It was much more rock and roll than the acoustic guitar strumming of Tyrannosaurus Rex. Mark Bolan had a totally distinctive voice and an individual lead guitar sound. It is like he had his own personal scale and amp settings. About the same time he played on the Bowie single, and it is instantly recognisable as him. The production is very sparse, yet the songs sound full. There are songs that work well with just a single acoustic guitar and an obviously double-tracked vocal. There is a song with chimes and wah-wah guitar,
But the sound that probably most represents Tony Visconti's T-Rex productions is that of a distorted electric guitar and string section, particularly when lines played at the bottom of the strings of the guitar are echoed or doubled by cellos. The album has the song Is It Love, which is so minimal it must have influenced the Ramones. It only has the lines Is It Love and You've Got to Rock With Love. The Ramones mentioned T-Rex in their song End of the Century. Then there is Seagull Woman, another simple lyric with a gorgeous melody and sweet backing vocals from Howard Kaylan and Mark Volman, the mothers who had been Turtles. I love everything about Seagull Woman. There was a very early Tyrannosaurus Rex single called 1 Inch Rock, which was very short. So when he did it on this album, Bolan added a long passage of scat singing. Bolan's scat singing is a mixture of doo-wop and more exotic vocal sounds that seem to be influenced by his semi-Jewish heritage and upbringing. Bolan wrote a lot more 12-bar blues than you would imagine, but rarely do they sound like a deficit of ideas. The lyrics are all bopping elf fairies and goblins, pagan festivals, Wind in the Willows and Lord of the Rings folklore. This is similar to all his previous work before everything became about cars, spaceships and sex metaphors. The big track on the album is a re-recording of the song that was released as a single when he was a teenager. The Wizard starts with the bang of a gong and has the trademark acoustic guitar strummed to matching congas, all joined by chromatic guitar as it builds to a crescendo of vocal oohs, squeals and screams, with all kinds of warblings and some serious strings. The later CD versions of the album contain Ride a White Swan and Summertime Blues as bonus tracks. There is also chanting on this album. We are the seekers of space, we've seen our master's face. It's young and old and silvery gold. We are the seekers of space. T-Rex by T-Rex.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Jason White and Stevyn Colgan for joining us. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared, announcements I've shared, etc. As always, feel free to reach out to me on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s they'd like to share, local arts news, stuff for the announcements section, potential guests. Do reach out to me, I would love to hear from you. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound on Facebook, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is the Rockola Mourning Band with Lucky Me. I'll catch you next week.
Sad news, oh my luck is worn. All my thoughts about you stand aside the norm. I've been trying to tell you about the dream I had. You avoid my glances, that's just I'm mad. Strange time, bad place. Accelerate away from me. All this time I'm learning to defeat the rest. All this time I'm striving to be my best. Trying to be sober about the choices made. Living for the moment when the ghost is played. Strange time, bad place. See my life accelerate away from me. for me.